I want people to understand that democracy prevailed yesterday. We certified the election of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. That was always going to happen. We stayed even after a violent insurrection, Democrats did, to vote for that. That is how we are going to continue to fight in the 117th Congress, and we will win this fight just the way we won yesterday. But we have to make sure that we are holding people accountable as well as we move forward.
All right, welcome. That was our guest this afternoon, Representative Mondaire Jones. Representative Jones will be joining us here on our first editorial spotlight live in quite a while. Joining me, I'm Ed Forbes for the USA Today Network Atlantic Group, Senior Director for News and Engagement. Joining me alongside the Congressman are two of my USA Today Network colleagues, Tiffany Cusack-Smith, who covers racial and social equity issues, and Mark Longariello, a veteran political and government reporter. Congressman, good afternoon and welcome. We're glad to have you with us. Looks like you're in D.C. today, nearly approaching the ballpark of 100 days in office. We have been watching you with interest, obviously. I know that you've had some FaceTime around the incidents of January 6th, obviously a huge stunning event to start your freshman term. We also appreciated your op-ed recently on voting rights. We are interested, given that we cover a swath of territory that's similar to your district's boundaries, all of Rockland County and large swaths of Westchester County. How are you managing representing such a diverse, dynamic, and complex district?
Well, Ed, let me start by thanking you and Mark and Tiffany for the opportunity to say a few words today about my first 100 days in Congress. To your point, starting off on January 6th, it was not something that I could have predicted and that most people would have predicted, but I'm really grateful with the support of the community that I represent to have hit the ground running. And on the subject of the task of representing what is a very diverse community, racially, socioeconomically, in terms of religion, immigration status, you name it, it helps to be from the community that I represent. I am someone who was born and raised in Rockland County, which I think most people understand to be the more under-resourced part of New York's 17th Congressional District, and certainly from a political vantage point, the less represented portion of New York's 17th Congressional District. And I've been very intentional about going into communities like the Black community and the undocumented communities that exist throughout New York's 17th Congressional District, and lower income communities, all of which have felt left out of the political process and underrepresented in the United States Congress and in the federal government writ large. And so I think it's that intentionality. Also thinking about the fact that Rockland has its own unique transportation issues, because we don't have that one-seat ride into New York City that my friends in Westchester County, where I reside today, have. And so just making sure that you're going into communities that help to make it so diverse in New York 17th, hearing them out and giving expression to their hopes and their dreams and their frustrations with government.
Well, thank you, Congressman. Yeah, the issues of diversity and access, particularly between the two counties, are perennial. And as you say, the access and the representation are constant concerns for our readers. So appreciating you put some thoughts into that. Obviously, too, the beginning of the Biden administration has not been uneventful. We have seen massive mobilizations on both sides of the Hudson River related to getting the vaccine, the shots into arms. The president has also triumphed with the stimulus package, now negotiating an infrastructure bill, all of this setting up a very interesting context for your district and our readers. I'm going to kick things over to Tiffany now, Congressman, and later we'll be joined by Mark, but we do have a number of questions we hope to get to. Readers, if you are interested in asking the Congressman anything, please just drop the questions into the chat. If time allows, we will get to your questions as well. Thanks. Tiffany, over to you.
Hi, Congressman. So I just wanted to go a little bit more into your backyard in East Ramapo and discuss the case that happened with the school district there between where it was alleged that the majority Black and Latino public school students were receiving less than the more white private schools funded by the district. And I was interested in getting your opinion on that case. And also, what do you think that the role that Congress can take in furthering integration of our schools in places like East Ramapo and elsewhere?
Thank you so much, Tiffany. Many of the viewers of today's live stream know that what is happening in the East Ramapo Central School District is deeply personal for me as a graduate of East Ramapo Public Schools. I got my K through 12 education in a place that at the time just delivered, as far as I'm concerned, the best education that a public school could provide. And in fact, it helped to catapult me later in life to the United States Congress. It helped to lift me out of the poverty that I grew up in and now allow me to come back to that same school district and bring more than $150 million through the American Rescue Plan for K through 12 public schools in the East Ramapo Central School District. This is a school district that many of your viewers will recall just approximately 1 month ago. It was proposed that there would be approximately 32 cuts in teaching and other staff positions and the combination of classes mid-year in the midst of a global pandemic when students, largely low-income students, are struggling to just distance learn. So it has been one of my top priorities to deliver real relief for East Ramapo. But we know that the other piece of that is governance, right? I mean, you can throw a lot of money at a challenge or a problem, and there won't be a panacea for what is happening there. There was a successful lawsuit, and so now the allegations have arguably been proven in court under the Voting Rights Act. That was a case that was filed by the Spring Valley NAACP under the Voting Rights Act. The Spring Valley NAACP was represented by the New York Civil Liberties Union, on whose board I used to sit. And the allegation was that under an at-large system of voting for the school board in the East Ramapo Central School District, it would never be the case that candidates preferred by the minority community, in this case, communities of color, would be able to get elected to that school board. And so the result was a ward system of voting to ensure some representation of the public school community, which is synonymous in this case with the racially minority community. And it speaks to, the need for that case really spoke to and continues to speak to an ongoing failure of governance, where you have a school board that is not doing enough for public school students in the district. That's where that $150+ million that I helped to secure for East Ramapo comes in. But we also know that we need to go further than that. It's why I convened with the interim superintendent an East Ramapo Public Schools advisory task force for the purpose of monitoring and advising on how that $150 million plus is spent under the American Rescue Plan, which has to be spent for public school students. And of course, state legislators have proposed that the state education department have a monitor with veto power over decisions of the school board.
Thanks, Congressman. An ongoing situation in East Ramapo that we've monitored for almost my entire career at the Journal News and beyond that as well. Mark, over to you.
Well, first, thanks, Congressman, for joining us. And I just wanted to ask about the SALT deductions. The suburbs you represent pay some of the highest property taxes in the country. And the Trump tax reform in 2017 capped SALT, that's the state and local tax deduction, at $10,000, meaning many in the region are paying more. Yet many Democrats, including some progressive members of the caucus, don't favor a repeal because they say most of the benefit would be for the wealthiest taxpayers. So based on, I know that your legislation is out there, where does Congress go from here?
Thanks, Mark. When I ran for Congress, I also made it a top priority to restore the state and local tax deduction. which, when it was capped at $10,000 by Donald Trump and his Republican allies in Congress in December 2017, resulted in 43% of households in my district, and which covers parts of central and northern Westchester and all of Rockland County. 43% of households saw their taxes increase. 43% of people in New York's 17th congressional district are not very wealthy people. These are middle-class people largely who saw their taxes go up. And of course, we know, yes, that if you are very wealthy, you also benefit from a complete restoration of the state and local tax deduction. But I have continued to maintain that there are more efficient ways of asking the super rich in our society to pay their fair share so that we can continue to fund essential government services without harming middle class and working people in Westchester and in Rockland County. So I think some of the pushback that we are seeing from some of my colleagues who are progressive, and Lord knows I ran a progressive campaign and continue to be one of the most progressive members of Congress, I think comes from a fundamental misunderstanding of what that $10,000 limitation in December 2017 actually did and how it harmed people. I support raising taxes on people who make $1 million or more. I actually would go further than what the president has done in his proposal in the transportation infrastructure package. I support treating capital gains as ordinary income so that people who work at McDonald's are paying the same tax rates as people who are Wall Street investors or who are just investing in the privacy of their homes. I support a wealth tax so that we can start to get at the obscene hundreds of billions of dollars in wealth accumulation that occurred over the past year and concentrated in the bank accounts of people like Jeff Bezos. But the way to do that is not to continue to limit the state and local tax deduction in New York State. Westchester and Rockland, by county, pay the highest property taxes in the entire nation. But of course, the state and local tax deduction is more than about property taxes. It's about state income taxes, which they don't have in Texas. And look what happens when you're a state that doesn't do state income taxes and as a result cannot invest in infrastructure. When it snows or there's some other climate disaster, the whole state shuts down. So I'm proud of what we've been able to do in terms of investing in infrastructure in New York State, but we need to go much further. And that's why I'm looking forward to this upcoming bill.
Yeah, thanks, Congressman. Lots of interest on SALT among our readers. A huge issue across the suburbs in New York. As you say, we pay probably the highest property taxes in the country. I want to turn back now to Tiffany, who's got some more questions.
Washington Post op-ed, he wrote that white supremacists are closer to restoring Jim Crow than at any time in memory. And then he went on to say, if we squander this opportunity, future generations will not and should not forgive us. I wanted to ask you about the urgency of now, and why do you think now is that the For the People Act and also the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act need to be passed uncompromised? And also, what type of impact will that legislation have on a state such as New York, a liberal state such as New York?
We know that despite the popularity of the things that Democrats in Congress have been doing this year, the American Rescue Plan, for example, being supported by 80% of the American people, including more than half of Republicans, we have seen gridlock, and by gridlock I mean not a single House Republican or member of the Senate voted for the American Rescue Plan. Despite the fact that local Republican elected officials have been very grateful to me for helping to secure many hundreds of millions of dollars for Westchester and Rockland County governments, for local townships and other municipalities. That it is a distortion of our democracy that about one half of the Congress is not actually advocating in the best interests of the people who elected them. And that's where the For the People Act, also known to people as HR 1, comes in. Through independent redistricting commissions, we will get better people in Congress, people who are more responsive to the median American voter. And when I say median American voter, I don't mean someone who's far right or far left, right? But it is because of Republican state legislatures who have been drawing congressional districts to make them look unlike what the American public looks like, that people like QAnon conspiracy theorists, including Marjorie Taylor Greene, with whom I share a hallway, and Lauren Boebert, who tries to sneak guns onto the House floor, are able to continue to be elected despite their fringe extreme views. And so independent redistricting commissions would help change that. It would allow voters to choose their representatives as opposed to people in office choosing who their voters are. The For the People Act also contains automatic voter registration, which would enfranchise an additional 50 million people nationally. And it would create a system of public financing of congressional elections so that billionaires and corporations cannot purchase congressional seats, like one of my opponents attempted to do, frankly, in the Democratic primary in the spring of 2020 through approximately $5.4 million in spending in his personal wealth. And all of these things are required in order for us to have a democracy. We are seeing in Georgia through the bill SB 202 an attempt to disenfranchise voters of color, working people, and young people. And indeed, that's happening in 43 different states, or it's being attempted in 43 different states, where we're seeing hundreds and hundreds of attempts to suppress the right to vote being proposed in state legislatures. And that is because the project of the modern day Republican Party is not to compete on the merits of its policy ideas. Those policy ideas tend to be losing arguments on any number of issues, including infrastructure, which I suspect they won't be voting for, as well as the American Rescue Plan, which is just common sense COVID relief as part of a national vaccination and testing strategy. And so the project instead has been to disenfranchise people. And in order for us to even have majorities in the Congress, in the House, and in the Senate over the next decade, especially in a redistricting year, where Republican state legislatures are attempting to distort our democracy, it is required to pass the For the People Act, but also the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, which would have prevented what happened in Georgia from even taking place, because it would have revived the pre-clearance provisions that the Roberts Court gutted in the 2013 Shelby v. Holder decision.
Voting rights, an issue likely here to stay for the duration of your term. It will be fascinating to see how that plays out, and we appreciate your voice on that issue, Congressman. Mark, back to you.
Congressman, you said previous COVID relief packages haven't gone far enough, particularly with direct relief to residents. I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts on the infrastructure proposal, and what can residents expect to see locally as a result of these packages?
I so appreciate that, Mark, and I'm grateful to have already been joining my friends from across the political spectrum, including the Republican supervisor in Clarkstown for a groundbreaking at the Klein Avenue Levee Improvement Project. And so it's those kinds of projects that are going to be funded, continue to be funded through the American Rescue Plan and through this transportation and infrastructure bill. The first iteration of which, we know that the president has broken his proposal, his Build Back Better proposal, into two different pieces of legislation. The first is called the American Jobs Plan, which is an approximately $2 trillion proposal to spending over the period of 8 years that will invest mightily in repairing our roads and our highways, in electrifying our bus fleets so that we can stop the carbon emissions that we are seeing contribute to climate catastrophe, where we're seeing the effects of that in the form of flooding, for example, in Rockland and in Westchester counties. A multi-billion-dollar investment in affordable housing, including public housing, as well as the refurbishment of public housing so that public housing is more sustainable and, again, does not contribute to the climate change that we are seeing. I don't think that the proposal goes far enough. I think it should be a larger proposal in terms of the money that is being proposed in spending. We don't know what the majority will look like in Congress in 2022. So we have to do what is required now rather than continuing to kick the can down the road. I mean, my friends in New York City will tell you the cost of rehabilitating NYCHA housing alone is estimated to be $40 billion. And yet the president has only proposed a total of $80 billion for the purpose of housing, of public housing in his proposal. So I think we need to go much further than that. And that's what I'm going to be looking at. I also support repealing the Trump tax cuts in December 2017, which we know went overwhelmingly to the top 1% and did not do nearly enough for middle class people. In fact, it crushed them in our district, where, as you know, part of those Trump tax cuts was that $10,000 limitation on the state and local tax deduction. So I think we need to be raising revenue in this bill. It's why I support increasing the marginal tax rate on millionaires and billionaires, and doing a number of other things to raise money, because I know people are concerned with the deficit all of a sudden on the other side of the aisle. I wish they would join me in helping to raise revenue.
We still have a few minutes here, so I think Tiffany and Mark, we should be able to get in another question each from you, and then Congressman, we do have some questions from readers who have joined us across our platform. So Tiffany.
So New York recently legalized marijuana with an eye towards marijuana justice. And Senator Chuck Schumer has come out and said that he is interested in doing it on the federal level. How do you center marijuana? Is the goal to center marijuana justice in the legalization on the federal level? Would you like to see that? And how do you do that, being that most, criminal convictions are on the state crimes? So,
well, Tiffany, thank you for pointing out that the vast majority of people in incarcerated settings are at the state and local level, and not at the federal level. It's why I'm so pleased to see what's happening in New York State and in so many other states throughout the country with respect to marijuana legalization. And let's speak truth. As the vice president said on the campaign trail, marijuana has been legal for white people writ large for a really long time now. If you look at the rates of arrests versus the rate of use, which is equal among white and black people, you start to see those disparities in who prohibition is being enforced against. And of course, we can regulate marijuana, the sale of it and the use of it, in the way that we do the sale and use of alcohol. And no one is saying we shouldn't, or at least I'm not saying we shouldn't. In fact, most people and everyone I know of at the state level in New York has said as much. And so I think it's important to clarify that for people who are concerned. But this is an issue of racial justice for the reasons that I described. And it is important also that as we legalize, we repair harms done to entire communities. I'm talking tens of millions of people all throughout this country, including right here in Westchester and Rockland County and New York State. We need to be expunging people's marijuana-related convictions so that they can actually get jobs and live in public housing and get Pell Grants so that they can go to college and just otherwise be able to, in addition to providing for themselves, provide for their family members. We also need to make sure that as we legalize and create a legal market, we are centering communities that have borne the brunt of the racist war on drugs that began in the 1980s. And I mean, minority entrepreneurs should be getting a significant portion of the licenses, the limited number of licenses that New York State and other states are going to be allocating, and that would authorize people to sell marijuana. And so I think that has to be part of the equation. We can't pretend like we didn't do damage for the past several decades, and it's why I'm so glad to be in partnership with Chuck Schumer on this issue.
Thanks, Congressman. Mark?
Congressman, you just announced that you were establishing your own PAC, Policy is Personal, supporting progressive candidates. Meanwhile, just overall, we've seen some debate over President Biden and how much he should try to work across the aisle to gain Republican support for some of his proposals. I'm just wondering how your PAC fits into the larger debate about within the party, centrists versus progressives, and how will that play out in policy in the future, do you think?
Yeah. Well, Mark, let me say, because I'm in my government office, I'll just speak generally about politics in the Congress. And that is, we need more progressives in the Congress who understand what is at stake in a variety of fights, including with respect to this American Jobs Plan, where we need to be putting more money into it for the purpose of making college tuition free, for example. If we don't have enough people in Congress right now who are going to vote for the only healthcare policy that would literally ensure everybody in this country in the midst of a pandemic, that being a single payer Medicare for all plan that I've supported from as early as the campaign, then we should at least be fighting to lower the age of Medicare eligibility to 50, which is what the Progressive Caucus is going to be pushing for. And I'm proud to be a deputy whip in the Progressive Caucus. But already I'm seeing that there are people who are a little bit too comfortable with the status quo, including within the Democratic Caucus. And so primaries matter in these districts that are safely Democratic. I mean, there are real differences, as there were between myself and people who ran against me. And I think people are seeing already, including folks who supported not me in the primary, that I'm leading differently than the way other people would have. And so I just think it's really important that we continue to elect underrepresented people. And by that, I mean progressives, as well as people who come from the communities that are closest to the pain. We still have a situation where I'm one of only 9 openly LGBTQ members in the entire 435-person United States House of Representatives. And I mean, it's a significant responsibility to always be the person that folks go to when LGBTQ issues come up. And I've already seen how my presence has made a difference in terms of conversations that we have. But we need to be making sure that we continue to get people elected to Congress who understand that we face overlapping crises and need big structural changes.
Congressman, we do have a question from a reader who wonders what your thoughts are in terms of what New York State should do in the event that H.R. 1 and S1 don't pass this year. Just curious if you might throw some color onto that. Lots of interest, obviously, in voting issues here in the Lower Hudson Valley.
It's a great question, and I know Bob from Ossining, and I'm so grateful to him for asking such an important question. For those of you who don't know, I serve on the Judiciary Committee. So in addition to having ran on saving our democracy as a candidate, it is just something that I'm laser focused on now in the Congress, having been instrumental in helping to pass the For the People Act, which it was not a foregone conclusion to pass the House of Representatives, by the way. It represents such a dramatic change from the status quo that people have to get comfortable with it. But they are common sense measures contained in this bill, and it's why I'm hopeful that we will at least reform the filibuster so that we can get it passed in the Senate. In the Senate, the bill is called S1, and it's still called the For the People Act. New York State has made strides in democratizing the state, making sure that people who ought to be eligible to vote are able to do so. We are seeing proposals for automatic voter registration that are going to be implemented soon, and of course, just being able to vote by mail was something that was transformative. It is why people who were running on campaigns that were responsive to the electorate, including criminal justice reform, were able to remain in office. And of course, consolidating our elections on June 23rd, as opposed to having separate federal and state elections, was also a radical improvement. So I would say New York State must continue to do what it is doing. Automatic voter registration, pressing forward on that. There's an independent redistricting commission that is set up for the purpose of drawing congressional districts. Obviously, I'm a fan of independent redistricting commissions, and making sure that we continue to have a place where voters are choosing their representatives as opposed to their representatives choosing voters.
Well, thanks, Bob Schloss from Ossining, for that question, and thanks, Congressman, for answering it. I know your schedule is tight, sir, and so I think we will wrap things up here. Deeply appreciate your time and your conversation with us, and hope that we can do it again soon. Just a quick programming note for readers. Those of you who are subscribers or longtime readers of the print editions of the Journal News will have noted on Sunday that we returned our print opinion pages to the newspaper. And we would love to have your letters to the editor and community views to publish in those pages every week. You can submit your views to letters@lohud.com. Letters to the editor should generally be in the 250-word range, and community views around 750 words. And you can also follow our opinion report, which is updated daily at lohud.com/opinion. Thanks again to Congressman Mondaire Jones for joining us this afternoon, and to my colleagues Mark Lingariello and Tiffany Cusack-Smith, and to our able producer behind the camera here, Peter Carr, a longtime visual journalist for LoHUD and the Journal News. Congressman, thank you. Take care.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Bye-bye.